So, the title of the talk this morning is Introduction to the Ennobling Eightfold Path, Part 2. And we've been grateful to have some newer people join us to our daily online. And so, going back to some basics of Dharma teachings that could feel very comforting, sometimes could feel repetitive, but we feel it's important to refresh our understanding. And I have found what can sneak up on me, not sure about you, is an expectation to produce a new Dharma talk every time I speak or every time we speak, and that you would want to hear something new from us and we would have to produce it. And it's just a kind of little sneaky expectation that creeps in there. And sometimes expectations can get in the way of listening to something that you're already familiar with. And always looking for something new or fresh or surprising, it can be another pressure in Dharma practice. So there's my preamble this morning before I launch in. In early Buddhist teachings, the Eightfold Path appears as a final element of a larger framework, the Four Noble Truths, or as we refer to them, the Four Ennoblings. And in classical teaching, each element of the Eightfold Path begins with a Pali word, samma, Samma. And this word is often translated into English as right, giving rise to kind of familiar phrases such as right view, right speech, right action. However, the English word right can be misleading. In modern usage, it often suggests a moral correctness, or a more firm rule about expected behavior, as in right and wrong. The Pali word samma, though, it's a richer word. It carries quite a few meanings, and that's always interesting about other languages, bringing this practice from the Pali language. It can also be translated as skillful, appropriate, even sometimes useful, when something's useful and works well, beneficial, or well directed. And you might even have some other ways that we could describe it. But these alternatives can convey something more important about the spirit of the teaching. The Eightfold Path, again, I said this yesterday, it's not primarily about obeying commandments. It's pointing towards actions and attitudes that reduce suffering and support well-being. So many modern Dharma practitioners understand samma as skillful or appropriate. That also tends to be tend to be common. And this helps shift that emphasis from a moral judgment to practical wisdom. We actually begin to see what leads to less harm, what helps relationships flourish in our lives, what supports clarity rather than confusion. And one way we can imagine samma is as a compass needle on the old, not so modern navigation device that we used for hiking, maybe, or trailblazing. It's not often used these days, but that needle on the compass, um, it doesn't command us or force us to move in a particular direction. Instead, it's more quietly orienting us. And I remember that needle, it would always shake a little bit. And when it moved around, it was never like static or stationary. And it never pointed to one spot with certainty, but it pointed in the direction of guiding you to small t truth, true north. So it gave you orientation, but it never like shouted at you. Hopefully it shouted a bit if you were in trouble. That's when you would really need that thing. But in a similar way, the Eightfold Path provides navigation for our lives. And when we meditate, reflect, and value our experience, we gradually learn to recognize those ways of thinking and acting that are, again, more clear, more kind, more curious, more stable. And over time, our discernment becomes more reliable. And we see that happen. We hear that with each other, that the discernment practice that we have becomes more reliable. So another difference between reflective meditation and some of the traditional presentations of the Eightfold Path, it is the order of the factors. So in classical teachings, the 8 factors are sometimes described as a particular progression. And usually you start with a right view and right intention. You have to get those right before you go into right speech and action and livelihood. And then they relate to your meditation practice with effort, mindfulness, and concentration. So there's a kind of, you have to have something together in a kind of moral way before you meditate. And that structure can be very helpful. It highlights the importance of ethical behavior as a foundation for meditation. And it really does emphasize a role of wisdom in guiding both. I would say with our practice, we tend to place less emphasis on that strict sequencing. When we look at our lived experience, we can see these aspects of life, they develop simultaneously and interactively. Changes in one area can change other areas. So, for example, greater awareness might help you recognize more unhelpful patterns in your speech. Adjusting how you communicate may affect your relationships, and that in turn influences your understanding or your view of yourself. So their view is actually an outcome of looking at speech and action rather than the view at first before you explore those factors. So we described the Eightfold Path as a set of mutually supportive factors of human life. And we use it rather than a linear progression. We look at how each strengthen each other. So a traditional, I like this traditional metaphor. In fact, we've talked about it quite a few times. I remember when Bill did a parallel metaphor of this, and I'll get to that in a second, because the metaphor is the image of a wheel. And this is the image of a wheel more like on carts that horses pull. And Bill did the image of a wheel on a sports car, I think. That was fun. But I'm going to stay with the cart today. And the the 8 factors are like spokes on that wheel of a cart. Actually, I'm not staying with it. I'm going on to the bicycles because I don't know if you remember running colorful ribbon through your bicycle spokes, through your bicycle wheels. And that if you didn't do that, you can imagine that those ribbons actually strengthen those spokes and create even more of an interdependence between them. So I went from the cart to the bicycle. But when those spokes are balanced and well aligned, a wheel can turn smoothly. So the metaphor for dukkha in ancient times was having a wobbly wheel, wobbly wheels. So in the same way, these different aspects of life, understanding, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, awareness, inward steadiness, these are all different spokes, which we're going to be, teaching to over time. They develop together. They support a life that moves more steadily towards wisdom, towards compassion, towards caring. And reflective meditation invites us to explore these dimensions, not as abstract ideas, but more as living questions within our own lives. How do we understand what's happening to us? What intentions guide our actions? How do our words affect others? And what patterns of mind lead towards suffering? What leads more towards peace? So by returning to questions like these are some of my questions. What are some of yours? The Eightfold Path becomes less a doctrine to be memorized. You don't even have to remember all the spokes of the wheel. I can't remember them often in one sitting. But we really move to a framework of ongoing discovery. Okay. I will end here for this morning's Dharma talk.